Hi everyone, I'm Allie Buckman with the Potomac Bead Company, and today I'm going to do an example for you on a beaded leather cuff. So the beaded leather cuff here has basically kind of this Chandlu style going on, but it has the end incorporated into it, and it's a multi-strand. This one here that I just finished, and I decided, oh, I should do a video on this because I'm making some personally for me for fall. I've done them a couple years ago, and I thought I haven't done a video on that, so I figured I'd join you guys in as I finished with this one and started off with another one as well. This one here for the beaded cuff is a little bit thicker, and it has a wider kind of pattern going on. And then for the example in the video, I'll do one that's a little bit thinner. If you need any of the materials to do this beaded leather cuff, you can go to the left-hand side here. If you're on a computer, it'll do little drop downs with the listing and the links to all of the materials used. Or if you're not on a computer, you're on your phone, below the video here there's a little details button which describes the video. If you press on that, then it will give you details, so that way you can do links underneath there for the little show more button in order to get any of the products that you need or to make a list. For the example here, I was using 2mm Greek natural leather cording, and you're basically doing two pieces of that. So you want about double your wrist plus 5 inches for each length. So when you're thinking about it, so you want to do double your wrist. So I have a 6-inch wrist, so I want 12 inches plus 5 more on each side. So I want about 22 inches for mine. I want two pieces that are 22 inches long. There's a lot of different ways to do these bracelets here. I'm doing it what I think is the most simplistic way, the easiest way that I have found to teach people, especially new beginners, that this might be a good new beginner project, and it's the easiest way to do it, that you don't need to kind of fold leather back and everything. So I'm going to be using two pieces of leather that are 22 inches long each. You'll have extra at the end, but it's always better to have extra than not enough. Again, for this one here, I did use the 2mm Greek leather cording. For the one that I'm doing, I'm going to be using 2 different cordings, just to show that when you do it in this style, you can kind of use whatever you want. I have a Greek leather in a brown 1.5mm, and then I have a 0.5 leather in black. I'm going to mix my colors, getting those nice fall tones, and I'll match up both my boots. In addition to my leather, and again, whatever you're doing, you're going to want about 22 to 24 inches times 2, whether or not you're doing 2 different sizes or all the same size. So you may want to have a ruler handy as well. In addition to that, you do need a button or something to close off with. So I just have a brass button here, this flower vortex button, and that I'm going to use at the very end of the project. Again, this bracelet that has the longer, I use some 8mm Amazonite down the middle, and then 4mm picture jasper, 6mm tiger's eye, and then some turquoise Hishi beads. And I use that the whole way down the project, around the clasp area and everything. For the project that we'll be working on to get that nice look, I'm going to change it up and just do a slimmer bracelet. Since I already have my thicker one made, I'm going to do a slimmer one. The process and the steps are the exact same. For this slimmer bracelet, I'm going to be using the serpentine, the green serpentine jade in 4mm, along with some 4mm in the champagne AB, and these are the 4mm Potomac crystal rounds. And I'm going to use those interchangeably along the outer edge. So instead of doing it 2 wide, I'm just going to do 1 wide. Down the center, where I have my 8mm in my epido up here on this one, in my Amazonite, I'm going to use 6mm in epido down the middle. So just to show you what the width is going to be, it's going to be right about that wide. So you're looking at a little bit less than half of the actual bracelet example that I have previously. When you look at it on my wrist, I have a small wrist, so it's going to take up a fair amount of my wrist size here with this 8mm, and basically the equivalency of 8mm and 8mm on the side. We're going to shrink it to 6 and then 4mm on each side. And like I said, I'm going to go ahead and intermix the Potomac crystals and that serpentine jade. To hold the whole bracelet together, I do want to use some wildfire beading thread, and going along with that fall theme, I am doing some green color here. You can also use Eslon, Ceylon of the thinner ones. Some people will use even silk cording, or if you do want colors to match, you don't want to see it, or you want a color to pop out, you can look at the different color of wildfires fire thread, excuse me, or you can look at some of the different threads like the KO thread or the 1G thread, because they come in tons of different colors as well, so you can match that up. Because all of those threads are nice and tough, it's not really going to matter what type of thread you use. So if you want to get ready to get started with all of this, you also want to have a needle ready. You can do a wide eye or a big eye needle if you want, or even a collapsible needle. I'm using a size 10 beading needle. If you do want to use pearls or anything on the outside, you may want a size 12 needle, but a 10 is going to work perfectly for me for my purpose. To get started, we are going to actually start, and I'm working here on my bead on it board. You can also have a hemp project board or a knotting project board if you want to work on that. Need something to hold on to it. That's kind of up to you. To get started, I am going to start with my inner row here of my beads. And you can see the inner row becomes the actual hole for the clasp. So whatever leather you want to use for your inner section, you want to get that one ready. And again, about 22 to 24 inches of that actual leather cording. You can even use cotton cording, which is kind of cool. This whole project is very diversifiable, that you can use all different, you can diversify it, use all different types of materials. So you want to get out your center bead, which is going to be your 6 or 8 millimeter bead, and also cut apart your 4 millimeter just to make kind of that graduated switch. If you have some 11/0 or 8/0 seed beads, you can even use those at the start to make it have a more kind of closed seamed end. Get out your leather, your center bead, and a good 5 to 8 feet of your wildfire beading cord. If you do run out of thread, there's tons of videos that I have adding thread to it. If I have an opportunity here in this video, I'll show you how to add to the thread as well. So the first thing I want to do is, when holding my piece of leather for my inner section, I want to make a loop that is big enough for my button to go through. So I have my button handy, and I don't want it to be too big that the button's going to slide off there, but I'm going to make sure that that button can fit in. Once I have a spacing here where I know the button can fit in, I have my needle and thread, and I'm going to go to the very end of that needle and thread to the very last little piece of it. What I'm going to do is simply tie this thread, so the needle's on the opposite end. I'm going to tie this thread around the leather. And I'm tying this around both sides of the leather. Once I have my knot, I'm going to do a nice tight pull. And then I'm going to make sure that my button still fits. If it's gotten too big, slide the knot up just a tiny little bit. Gotten too small, slide the knot down a little bit. Once I have it right in the place that I want it to be, and I'm making sure that my leather is still even, I'm going to wrap the thread around one more time and tie another knot. One more time, and I'm tying another knot. So I'm just tying knots basically around the leather cording. I also forgot to mention, you may want to have a thread burner and also some super new glue handy in order to help you at the ends. So I want to make sure before I get too much further that my button is going to fit through, no problem. And it has just a little bit of wiggle room there. And I'm going to pull nice and tight on those ends. If you want to, you can also have some pliers handy to give a nice tight pull. At this point, I'm going to separate out my leather. If you do have a hemp or a knotting board, you can tuck this into the knotting board and work right below it. If you've ever have done a Chandlu style bracelet, which is very similar to this, then you'll know exactly kind of how to start and how to hold it. If you're unfamiliar with working with this, you can even stop and look at the leather wrap videos and kind of watch those first as well. I'm going to go in here and I have my crystal first, because that's going to be a nice spacer to start out before my epido beads. I'm going to pick up one of my crystals with my needle, push it all the way down my thread. So your thread's going to be really long. And we're going to kind of tuck it between the two pieces of our leather cording. So right along there. I'm then going to take the thread and needle, and this step is going to be very repetitive. I'm going over one side of the leather, and I'm going to take the needle back through the crystal so that it's going from the right side to the left side. What that's going to do is, as I pull, you're going to see that it is going to grab on to the side of the leather, and that bead is going to sit kind of right in the middle. I'm going to push it up into that space again and give a nice tight pull. On the opposite side, to hold it in place, taking that thread over the top of the strand of leather on the opposite side, underneath the leather and through the bead. Pull the cording nice and tight. And you're going to have that bead then centered right along in the middle. That bead that's centered right in the middle is going to be our starter bead. From now on, I'm going to go around the leather and underneath the leather cording. You can also take your leather kind of over the top at the very end. Once my thread is underneath the leather, I'm going to pick up an epido bead, let that drop down into place without getting the other side kind of all twisted up here. So I'm dropping that epido down right in between those two lines of leather. On the opposite side here, on my left side, or the bottom, I'm going to go around the leather with my thread, underneath, and take the needle back through that epido bead. Pulling nice and tight, that'll get the leather, as you see, that cording, the thread will go right around the end of the leather. On the opposite side, now you can see the bead is just kind of hanging out. Go over the top of the leather again, take your needle and thread underneath the leather and back through the epido bead. You're then going to see a piece of leather on each side of your bead. You're also going to start to notice kind of a zigzagging effect where the thread on one side shows twice coming out of the bead. It's going to be to the right and then to the left, to the right and to the left. That's how you're going to know that you have the correct amount of threads going through your bead to hold it in place. There's also some other methods which will have two needles going through the bead simultaneously, tucking under the leather and going through the next bead. I like to do it because I like to have one needle in my hand at a time when I'm working with it. To add my next bead, I'm going to take my thread and needle underneath the leather on the side that my needle is coming out. So on this end, it's the left side. It's coming out under there in between the two pieces of leather. Adding my next epido bead. Dropping it into place between those two pieces of leather. Right there. Once it's in place there, again, the thread is always going to go the same direction. So it's going over top of the leather on the right hand side, needles going underneath the leather and back through the bead. Pull that nice long thread through, making sure that it's not twisted on the other side. And once that pulls through, you'll see the one piece on this right hand side. On the left hand side, it's just kind of the cross piece there. So on the left hand side, I'm going to switch it in my hand, go underneath the leather cording and back through the bead. And I prefer actually to hold this rather than using a knotting board. It's kind of up to you which method you want to use. Now I know that I have one thread through my epido bead on each side. When I come over to the opposite side here, again, I have that zigzagging going on. Two threads there, two threads here, and I'll have two threads on this right hand side now because I had two threads on the left hand side first. Tuck that thread underneath the right hand side, and I'm going to continue adding my epido beads right in place until it is a little less than the length of my wrist. I want about a 1/2 inch less than the length of my wrist, and then I'm going to stop and get ready to add my strand on the outer side. So just continue doing that chandler style of going through the bead, kind of zigzagging every other, the whole length of your wrist minus ½ inch. So I'm at the end of my epido row here, and you want to make sure, I want to mention that when you're working with your beads here, you want to make sure that you have space in between the beads and they're not really smack up dab next to one another. What happens in that case is that there's crowding. If you've done the chandler style bracelet, you will know exactly what I mean. You want to make sure that the beads are sitting nice and kind of next to one another, but you do want a little bit like a 1 to 2 millimeter gap between them. If they're sitting really, really close, you can have bunching and kind of go across from one another. Just to give you an idea here, I have about 18 of the 6 millimeter beads, plus my 2 4 millimeter crystal on the end. When I'm looking at the bracelet, just to show you, here's how I have it at the end. So you can see the loop kind of almost touches my beads, but those beads are a good about ½ inch away from the actual end of the bracelet. That's because when you're doing the clasp, you'll have a fair amount more space to bring the side 2 strands together before putting on the button. And then the outer loop that's kind of hiding there will even make it a little bit bigger. At this point, what I'm going to do at the very end is take my leather here and bring it together by wrapping my thread and needle around both pieces of leather. Grab your needle, sew through that loop that you've created with the thread, and that'll create a little knot at the end of the thread. Wrap it around again, underneath, make that loop, sew through the loop, and get that lower knot. I'm going to leave enough thread on the end of my cording here that if I need to put back on the needle to make it a little bit longer or pull some of those knots out, I could. Take your thread burner or your scissors and just leaving yourself about 6 inches, you can burn off the rest of the thread and needle. The rest of this thread and needle now will start up the side of the project and go the whole way around. Some projects, again, there's tons of varieties on this bracelet, will start here at the top, leaving yourself about half the amount of thread on one side of your needle and having the other side of the needle have the same amount of thread. So you'd have like 3 feet on one side and 3 feet on the other side, leaving a 3-foot tail basically and starting at the top as we add our second piece. I'm not going to bother doing that. I'm actually going to start at the bottom because I know the length that I want to get. I know that my button is fitting comfortably, and I think it's uncomfortable when you're new, especially to beading, to start at the actual side, or at the actual top rather. So if you do want to start at the top because you're not exactly sure kind of whether or not you need to be done here, what you want to do is you're going to fold over your leather, and basically what start I have, you're actually going to start at the top right here at your loop. So I have my thicker, my 1.5 millimeter leather, and I have it folded over right in the middle so my ends are at the same length. From there, I'm going to fold over the leather and just kind of let it hang out right there along the top and bring it down the sides. When I come down to the side here, I have my piece of thread, and what I'm going to do is actually pinch that new piece of leather onto the older pieces of leather. If you wanted to, you could have left the actual thread end here and then worked with the thread end on the opposite side if you do need more for the middle, but I'm going to start on this end. Again, if you're unsure the size, you may want to start actually at the very top. When we get to the top, I'll describe that a little bit more. But I'm going to tie around basically these 3 pieces of leather. You can see I'm just doing a series of square knots, and these will actually be hidden by our button, so you don't have to worry about too much thread showing. So I have my square knots in there holding my leather in place. I have my 4 millimeter beads out both my crystals and my 4mm serpentine here. And what I'm going to do is get ready to start like we just did on the side. To start on this side here, I'm kind of letting the leather hang out along the outer edge. And this time our inner edge of our leather, that 0.5 leather, is going to act as our left hand row, and the right hand will be our thicker leather. So you can see it's just going to kind of hang out there even though I have it doubled over. We can kind of push it off to the top so it stays out of the way. What I'm going to do first is grab one of my 4mm beads here on my needle, let it drop down next to my project, and I'm going to force it in place around and underneath the leather and around to sit in between the two cordings. Once it's in between those two cordings, I'm going to take my thread and needle. We're going to go under the black leather cording in between those two beads. So when you look at it, you'll see that it's going between those two beads and underneath the cording. Give a nice tight pull. And then just like we've been doing, I'm going to sew then through my bead and back down basically towards my starter strand. And that's going to hold it in place. The reason I did under on that one was just kind of to hold the cord a little bit. From now on, we're going to do over just like the opposite sides. So I'm going to go underneath the leather and sew through, back through that 4mm bead. And that's going to have my leather be on the outside there, on that one strand. On the opposite side here, I'm going to sew over the bead and through the leather and get ready to add my next bead. And I'm just going to do in every other pattern where I pick up my crystal next, drop the crystal in between that leather strand, make sure that my thread is first going over the leather. I like to be consistent. If you happen to go under, nobody's going to notice, but I like to go over the leather, take the needle under the leather, get the thread right on there, give a nice tight pull. Again, leave a little bit of room between your beads here. You don't want it super tight. Go over the leather in the middle, sewing through that middle strand of my leather and under that left hand inner strand, back through the crystal with the needle coming out over the leather. And that gives a nice tight pull, and that's going to pull that right in there. Now my next bead that I put on is going to be my serpentine bead there, and I'm going to do it in the same fashion. As you're working with these, you want to make sure that you have enough space in between, so that way, again, the beads aren't kind of rubbing around one another. So you can see now as I'm continuing along, you want to try as much as possible to make the strands of the thread to kind of be even with the end of the gemstone. It's going to make it set as nice as you can here. But I'm lining up right along the middle, and I'm just making sure to hold it up every once in a while to make sure that that placement that I'm putting the thread between the beads is correct. So again, I'm sewing kind of under my beads here, going and then creating my next bead in line, which is going to be my mix of my crystal here. I can move the leather around rather than really worry about going over or under. I just kind of pull the leather over the thread, especially if your thread is really long. Give a nice tight pull, making sure that it's lining up nice and even and that you have some space in between. So over the project and under that leather, pulling the needle through, get that tail out of the way, back through the crystal and over the top of the leather. You can see the extra thread kind of showing there. Give a nice tight pull, and that'll pull it in together. So I'm just going to continue going up the project right up along this side, adding in my 4mm beads here. When we get towards the top, like we're going to go around, then I'll connect back with you guys and I'll show you how we get from one to the other. So I've come down the whole bracelet, adding in my pattern of the crystal and the 4mm. And as I'm coming around to my loop, what we're going to do is take the Greek leather here right around the leather and basically make a little loop for the button. So here I use the picture jasper to make the loop. Here I'm going to use the serpentine to make my loop. Here especially, you want to make sure when you're making your loop that you have extra space and that the beads are not crossing one another. It's better to have more than enough room that they can kind of roll around than have them crossing one another, because that'll create some bunching and some bowing basically with your loop, which will make your button not sit as nicely once it's inside. So to go around here, I have my last 4mm that went in right after that crystal and then came out. I'm going to go underneath the strand, add in my next bead here, continue going under the leather, through the bead, over the leather on the other side. I'm just going to push that tail out of the way here. Push it down just a tiny bit. Go back under the leather and through the bead again. When I'm coming out, I'll go under the leather, just going through that loop, add my next bead, and again, rather than continue with my pattern, I'm just going to do my gemstones here at the end. Go in and continue going over and under, getting to the other side, over and under, coming out over. When I'm on the outside, then you're just going to kind of take the leather and push it to the other side. I'm just going to kind of hold it there, pinching, and the leather will move as we get tighter and tighter. But again, just going right along, adding in my next bead here, and making sure, still in the pattern, that I'm starting by going over the leather, under, getting back to the starting side, going over and under, and coming out over. Continuing on, then you're just going to literally continue on with your loop the whole way. What's going to happen then is you're going to get to the top and it's going to kind of wrap itself around. So I like doing it this method because it's really not any different. You're just doing the same thing over and over. I think this is a nice, easy way for beginners to learn how to do this kind of more complicated look of the beaded leather wrap. So you can see I'm leaving space in between those beads as I come around to the other side. And I'm just going to continue adding in those beads here as I go right along the edge. So I've gotten the whole way around the loop, and you can see the way that it sits nicely, and you can see its extension from the bracelet. When you get to the opposite side of the loop, so I'm right here kind of finishing up, if you want to, before going back through the last bead, you can actually take it through over the 2 strands of leather. So not just the one, I'm going through the middle 2, and that'll kind of hold those in there in the middle. Back through my gemstone, over my leather, give a nice tight pull, and that'll pull those leather strands in there one more time. Make sure that your button still fits through comfortably. And then you're going to separate out your leather, starting going back down the line here, getting ready and in to create with a crystal row as well. So I'm going to go in here and start up on my crystals and just continue down the whole way to the other side, adding in my second row of my beads. I'm at the very end of the bracelet, and you can see it's sitting here all nicely, and kind of how it's going to sit on the wrist once I have it done. And once you get to the end and you have that last 4mm bead, if you want, like I said, and you have 11 O-seed beads, you can decrease from 2 to 1 to 1, and that'll bring that in a little bit better there at the end. I'm not going to bother because that requires you guys to have another thing right on hand, but if you do, sometimes that can make it a little bit clearer and kind of nicer at the end. At the very end, I want to make sure that I'm coming out in the middle of the project, even if that means doing a double edge kind of right there on the end. I have 2 strands already hanging out here with my thread from the first 2 sets, the middle and then the side. And what I'm going to do is basically take this piece here that I just went through, tuck it down through my leather cording, just as if I was getting ready to start again. Make sure that none of the leather gets mixed in. That's going to bring it further down a little bit on my project. Pinching the ends together, I'm going to bring it back into a basically a collection of those. And what I'm going to do is with my thread that's attached to my thread and needle, I'm going to wrap around all of those threads, try to make sure that my leather kind of stays in order so that the darker leather is on the outside. If you're using the 2mm, you want to do the same thing so that way the strands stay in order as well. If they don't stay in order, it's not a huge deal. Just kind of one of the things, again, that can make kind of a cleaner end. And I'm wrapping this cording right around the end here. Round and around we go. I'm kind of covering up a lot of those ends. And you can tell I'm wrapping it down so that way it looks nice and finished and has a nice kind of wrapped edge to it. Once I have my wrap done, those edges are going to be together. And it's also going to bring me kind of to the top of those beads, or the top right near the beads. Tucking the other strands underneath, I'm going to bring them together and tie all 3 pieces together in a knot. 2 threads on one side, 1 on the other. I do have my super new glue handy then, and I will use that to kind of after I burn down the edges to kind of secure that a little bit more. And I'm tying another knot here, getting all those together. So there's a knot right there, kind of balling those up together. Once I have that, I am going to burn my thread ends down just a little bit just to get rid of them. Not burning them off completely because I will burn them smaller basically when I get ready to glue it. If you do have the bigger leather, and this is why I didn't finish this one off as I was working with it, you can see I did the same thing here, kind of wrapping around those 4 edges. And then what I did is a square knot. If you're unfamiliar with that square knot, there is a YouTube tutorial on it, a square knot, a hemp knot, it will also be called. 2 strands are running through the middle and you're tying one knot and the other knot. We're going to do something similar here. Taking those 2 middle black pieces of leather down the center. With my brown cord, I'm going to make a loop that crosses over those 2 black cords. The leather on the opposite side is going to cross over the first one there, and then go through and underneath that other loop. So if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a macrame or a square knot. On the opposite side, to make it lay nice and flat, and right up next to my project, I'm going to make a loop hanging out on the left-hand side there. My right piece will go over the top and then through the middle of that loop. When I pull nice and tightly here, you'll see then that knot kind of lays really nice. One loop on one side, one loop on the other side, and that brings the project in. Because I have a thin cording here at the end, I'm now going to take these middle two pieces and put my button on. If your button has a hole, you put it up through the middle. If it has a shank like that, both strands are going through the button shank. Also, if you don't have the button shank that it's going to fit through both, you can just fit through one. On the opposite end then, all I'm going to do is tie those together and force that down as close as I can underneath the back of the button. If it gets nice and tight, you can also separate those like I did on this one. I just separated them and tied a knot, one knot and then another knot, doing a square knot there. Because this one here is going to stop the button, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to do a simple cut then on the back of this cording. And after I pull this nice and tight, I'll show you guys, we're going to do a little dab of glue. So I have a dab of glue and I'm going to put right there on that one, right there on my end of my cotton, and right there where my leather kind of joins together. Go back into the project, and anywhere that there's another end, I'm just going to do a little dab of glue there. As that dries then, I'll take my thread burner and burn down any edges that I may have. Anytime you are using glue too, you want to take it off your bead board so that way, or your bead mat, so that way it doesn't stick to the board or the mat. Now that I've gotten all my ends down, I'm modeling my bracelet. It's fun, you can wear it to the front, or you can wear your button to the back there on the wrist. So you have it to the front, the back. The fun thing is the button adds, it's really cool to have that kind of loop already created. You cover up most of that at the end. If you want, you can also kind of finish off the end, and then I've seen a number of different customers have kind of sewn the button up through the back so that way it's more continuous. But the fun thing with the beaded bangle is you really can use anything. So again, back for the beginning one here, just still need to cover off here, or cut off here. You can see the difference in the size of the length. Again, basically double, or a little bit less than double the size of the one that I just did. And all I did for this one was use the 8mm down the middle, and then just increase from the end, starting smaller and getting bigger along the center till I had 2 4mm or an 8mm wide basically, and created a pattern off of that. I had said that I would show you guys basically how to start with the loop end, and I have this one here, so I'll kind of use that as my little example. And if you do want to start at the loop end with your second strand, all you're going to do to create that loop end and to start with the loop end is actually go in and start again with about 3 feet on one side of beading thread and then 3 feet on the other side. Start right here at the top, and then you can go down the side simultaneously. Go down a little bit on one side, go down about a little bit on this side. So it's almost basically like having 2 needles on, that you'd have a thread end on one end and the other one as well, kind of starting in the middle. That's how you would start in the middle of the project if you did want to start on the end there in the middle and kind of continue to go. I really love how these bracelets turn out. I love the kind of functionality of it, the look of it. You can have fun looking for vintage buttons, getting that as well. And when it's on, you don't see any of that knotting in the back. If you want to, you can also just do a single strand. We have a video for that as well. Again, if you need any of the materials to do this beaded leather bangle, or leather cuff rather, you can go back to the beginning of the video to the little drop down menu, or you can go below the video to the details in the description that show more button and click on that. Get links to all the different gemstones that were used in the examples, as well as the one that we did together also. As always, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel too to get regular updates on projects like this and information about different classes that we have and basic tutorials on stringing, new jewelry design ideas, see what we've been working on, things that we're playing with, new products, as well as regular updates, like I said. You can also check us out on Facebook in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, or our Potomac Bead Company Facebook page as well. You can there interact with all different customers if you want to be in our beading group, answer questions, really be involved with different customers, helping them out, being a really great forum for the beading world, helping people pick colors, judge what you need, what you could do in this situation, which bead you can put there. And it's really an awesome forum if you just kind of look through the pictures even to see all the beautiful and wonderful things that people create and design. As always, everybody, thanks for watching, and if you need any materials, feel free to shop with me online at PotomacBeads.com. If you haven't had a chance to make any of the Chandlu style or this leather beaded cuff, have fun creating, and I will warn you, they're kind of addicting. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and have fun creating.